This is going to be the quick 15-minute, 10-minute pre-camp, pre-ride checkover. Make sure your kid's bike is safe and ready to go. We're going to kind of go through what I commonly see at Kids on Bikes camps on Monday morning as coaches are checking everybody in and the kids are all getting in going. Depending on the level of camp, you're going to see probably some department store bikes and then some bike shop quality bikes. The main thing I like to make sure is happening with any bike that's going out, whether it's for a camp or a neighborhood ride, is to make sure the bike is safe. I.e., it can stop, it can steer correctly, and the wheels are going to roll and not fall off. So with a lot of times with a coaster brake bike, you'll have the wheels bolt on, which most anything will that's relatively modern will be a 15 millimeter. And I always just like to spot check and make sure that they're solid, and then I like to grab the wheel and just make sure nothing feels like it's jiggling, which would indicate that the bearings are misadjusted. If it's really bad and goofy, that would be a hey, pedal station, contact Mark or Kip or Jess, and like, hey, we need a bike. This just isn't going to fly. And then on the rear of a coaster brake bike, you typically have the same nutted axle. You can use a 15 mil, or if a handy tool to have is an adjustable crescent in your pack or in your bag. The thing to remember with a crescent wrench, though, is in whatever direction you're tightening, the direction you're pulling from is the fixed side. If you're pulling from the side that can move, they can slip. Some mechanics will call these professional nut rounders because people don't typically use them correctly. So if you're tightening, you want that side there. If you're loosening, you want the fixed side on the top there. So that handy tool that doesn't take up a lot of space, so you aren't carrying a bunch of sides. You do have to keep in mind that you want the fixed side of the wrench on wherever the stress from either tightening or loosening is. Ideally, I like an open-end wrench just because there isn't any room for it to slip. So I like to spot check that. Grab both wheels. Make sure nothing's really loose or wobbly, that the wheel isn't going to fall off. The other thing that's really important on a coaster brake bike is if you look here, there's this arm that's attached to the hub, and there's a little bolt right here. You want to make sure that bolt is there and at least tight, because that's what there's a cam brake inside the hub, and that's the backpedaling brakes. And if that arm isn't fixed correctly, the kid won't have any brakes. So it's typically a 9 or a 10 millimeter bolt. And again, you can use the crescent to hold that in place. and typically a Phillips or another 8 or 9 on the other side here. And you want to make sure that that's good and snug. It doesn't need to be reefed on there, but it needs to be snug. That way, you know that when you backpedal, the kid has some brakes there. Gets real tricky when you have a flat tire in the rear, because then you have to undo this in addition to, you know, the 15 millimeter nuts here. So, you know, not losing that bolt or and making sure that gets reassembled correctly after you've done a flat is pretty important there. So wheels are solid. They aren't jiggly. The other thing, cranks, making sure that they aren't real jiggly. A lot of the more inexpensive bikes, they have a loose bearing system here, and it's a one-piece crank. So the bearings get adjusted here, but if they're really loose, it'll wear funny, and it really adds a lot of friction. So if you're you know, a 40-pound kid, that drastically affects your efficiency to pedal. So I always like to check this real quick, make sure there isn't any super duper play. And then the final thing for a coaster brake bike is I like to grab the front end. Sometimes it's hard to feel unless you have something to block the front wheel against, like a tree or a curb, and you can kind of put some weight against, and you can feel if there's any play in the bearings or the headset here. And that's just making sure that the bike steers correctly, and then a lot of times these threaded headsets have what's called a quill stem, which I always like to make sure that that's good and tight. This is a 13 mil. Again, it's, you know, having a small crescent is super handy for, and again, it's, you know, the side that can move, you want that on the direction that you aren't putting force again. Otherwise, it can slip and you can ram nuts. So I always just like to spot check that, make sure it's tight. And the other thing is, you can, if you grab the tire and the handlebar and you can't get it to twist, then it's tight. And it's tight enough for the kids and the camps. So that's a basic coaster brake bike. Here we got a 20-inch kids bike with V rim brakes and some gears. So a little bit more complexity, but again, you know, for the simple, quick pre-camp checkover, I like to make sure the wheels aren't wobbly or loose, or I can feel any play in the hub. Sometimes if you just grab the fork leg and the wheel, you can feel if there's anything going on there. Like to feel if there's any give or any jiggle in the headset. Grab the bars and the wheel and make sure you can't twist anything. This is using a threadless stem, so it clamps around the steer. This typically is less likely to be loose or have problems versus the quill style. Grab the cranks, make sure that there isn't any play there. Rear wheel, there isn't any play. This has nuts on the front and rear hub. The other thing you'll see is a quick release on a lot of times the front wheel and or the back wheel. And there's this little lever that cams the wheels closed. And The springs typically need to have, or they have the narrow side facing towards the hub and the wide side facing towards the nut or the cam mechanism. Kip was telling me that he had some kids at lunch playing with their bikes, and they like took apart their quick releases, and then he had to and they lost some of the pieces, and he had to like drag a kid home, pushing down on the front handlebars, and drag him back to camp to the parking lot because he had no quick release on his front wheel, so he was keeping the kid's front end down, you know, on the way back. So, you know, if you stop for a long period of time, especially with the younger kids' camps, you know, you might want to do a quick spot check of quick releases if the bikes have those. You know, with the older camps, that's typically not a problem, but just something I found pretty humorous and, you know, something to be aware of. So since this has rim brakes, you want to make sure that the pads are hitting the rim pretty evenly, both at the same time. And I also like to grab the pads, and this one's kind of loose, so that could turn and cause problems. So I like to just grab those and put a little mustard on them, and both of these are loose. So with these guys, it's typically a 5, sometimes a 6 millimeter, sometimes they're nutted. So basically I'm shooting for them to hit the rim pretty flat. That's going to give the most power. Sometimes it's kind of squeaky that way, but